with Dan at Sarah Makers, and welcome back to another Tool Tuesday. In today's Tool Tuesday, we're kind of continuing on with the theme that we had a couple episodes ago, which was sheet metal cutting tools. This episode, we're going to cover sheet metal bending tools. It's kind of the next step of once you cut the metal, now you might need to bend it. So not everybody has that need, but if you're doing remodeling, renovation work, you'll hit duct work, you'll hit exhaust fans, just all sorts of random different little sheet metal things where some of these tools may come in really, really handy and make your day. Others are more advanced and you may not need. If you're getting into sheet metal siding, like delta rib siding, kind of like this stuff that you see at Home Depot and on barns and pole barns and things like that, where you're getting into a standing seam roof, you might need some of these other tools. So the goal of bending the metal, more or less, is to both make it fit what you're trying to do, and also if you're doing metal roofing or siding, you want to, in a really nice installation, you don't want to have raw edges where it's just a sharp cut edge. You want to put a hem on it. You want to bend it over so you've got a nice finished edge that actually isn't going to cut you when you rub against it. It's not going to be raw metal that's cut where you might get rusting or something like that. So it just makes for a nice professional finished product. So as I said, not everybody needs all these tools, but starting out, you know, if you're in a position where you need to bend some sheet metal, you need to make it look decent, you don't have anything else, maybe a couple bar clamps and a couple 2x4s or boards of some sort that you can clamp on the metal where you need it bent, and you can actually use these as like handles and pry up and bend. You might need some help doing it to push the metal around that edge of the board as you're prying it, but that is an option. You can also come back with, say, a rubber or plastic mallet like this and just tap along the edge of that board where it's started to bend and tighten it up, give you a little bit nicer bend. So that's a pretty basic, simple way of bending the metal. Another option would be these hand benders. They come in quite a few different styles, but they're all generally the same. You know, a bunch of different brands, bunch of different companies make them, and they all do the same thing basically. That's just in a limited area, you can get them on the edge of a piece of metal, and you can just pry the handle and bend it. So it's handy for some things. You know, if you got a little tab or ductwork or something, you can clamp these on there, bend it by hand, quick, easy. Most of them that you're going to find are about 3 inches wide. There are some 6-inch wide ones. The wider you get, the more effort goes into bending that sheet metal, and also the thicker or heavier gauge sheet metal becomes more challenging. So I have a couple different brands and a couple different styles in one brand. Both of these are made by Malco. Malco makes a lot of HVAC sheet metal type work tools. This is a very old one, so as you see, it's got black handles. One of the drawbacks of this is the handles slide off. The new ones are molded on, they don't slide off. Most of these have a little locking lever so you can lock the jaws in the closed position. The older Malcos here, they actually had another tab on the other side that looked a lot like the locking tab. It's not the most convenient to operate or bypass, but it will swing up out of the way so it doesn't hit the bolt on the side of the hinge, and you can open the jaw up quite a bit. One of the drawbacks is you've got very little leverage on there, and once you get past closed, another bolt on the side of it pushes that lever back down, and it goes back into its limited range of motion. These are good also for closing up hems where you've basically tried to bend the metal 180 degrees. You can clamp on there and squeeze it and give it a nice tight closure on the hem. So these are straights, old generation. These are the newer generation handle. These particular ones, the bent offset ones, they don't have an override to open up wider than they do here. So that's one drawback, but the handles don't slide off. The lock is at the thumb here instead of on the side, and even the new straights that resemble this tool but look like this one, they have the thumb lock there. One of the benefits and drawbacks of these particular pliers, these Malcos, is that the jaws, the inside face of these jaws, are milled or machined or serrated in such a way as to give you extra grip. That is great if you're dealing with galvanized sheet metal like ductwork where you're not worried about seeing it. If the metal has some oil and a little bit of moisture on it, it grips the metal and holds on and allows you to do what you need to do a little bit easier, but it does scratch up the finish. So if you're dealing with siding or roofing, you might want to take a piece of cardboard or something and fold it over the edge before you start messing with it. That way you're not scraping up the paint. The paint that comes on sheet metal like this is pretty special, and it goes through a lot of steps in the factory to bake it on, prepare it, cure it, all those things. So to go and field touch it up is not an easy, reasonable task. So the more you have to touch up in the field, the more difficult it is, the more time you waste. So that is one drawback of these pliers, is that serrated jaw. If you do notice on the sides of these jaws, they do have little V notches. Those are at 1/4 inch increments, so you can do a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4, or 1 inch fold, and just put the jaw over the edge of the metal, and you can easily see it. Those run $50, $60 a pair, so they're not exactly cheap, but they are very handy. Now, a little less expensive, around $30, is this pair of WIS hand folders. This again is a 3-inch wide. It's got a lock on the side. In the amount of time that I've used them, I've had this bolt back off from being locked and unlocked to where the lock tab actually bypasses the other bolt and they won't lock because it sticks out too far. The handles on this, I think they're pretty reasonable. They're probably not going to fall off. They do have a lanyard hole if you're working on a ladder outside of a building on a roof or something. That might be nice to have a lanyard so they don't fall off a roof on you. The jaws, again, they have markings on the sides for your 1/4 through 1 inch folds or bends. And the nice thing about the inside of this, which is also a benefit and a drawback, is that these are smooth. They won't mar up the metal like the Malcos will with their textured grip, but being that they're smooth, if the metal is oily or wet or anything like that, they tend to slide off, and you have to really push it on to the edge of the metal to try and keep them in position, or else they'll just kind of slide their way backward and off the edge. They are not quite as good quality, in my opinion, as the Malcos, because as I've had these, I've noticed that the jaws, the two sides pivot, and they are no longer beautifully aligned. So that is one drawback of these WIS. But a little bit more affordable, $30-ish range. Now another common folding tool that you might see are these plate benders. I call them plate benders. They probably have a technical name, but these are also made by Malco. This is a 12F and this is an 18F. If you can guess, this is 12 inches wide, this is 18 inches wide. Basically, it's two pieces of metal. They're joined together with some spot welds, and it has a gap. It's opened up on either side, so you can insert metal on this side or this side. This is a 3/8 inch hem or bend depth. This is 1 inch. Same with this tool here. Length is the only thing that differs. They have diamond index holes, or diamond shaped indexing holes, and witness holes, I guess you could call them, on the top and bottom at both sides. So as you slide this onto a piece of sheet metal, you can verify that your metal is actually all the way into the bender as it should be. So the benders, the more narrow they are, is you slide it onto the piece of sheet metal and you bend it up. The easier it'll be, the wider it gets, the more challenging it is because you're bending a lot more metal. So if you have thick metal or a wider bender, those are both going to contribute to a more difficult bend. One thing that I've run into in the past is that as you bend thicker gauge metal, these tabs, especially on the 1 inch hem side or bend side, they will open up or start to spread out. So typically I'll come back with my hand seamers or hand benders, and I'll just put it on where it gets wide, and I'll give it a little bit of a squeeze and it bends back into place. Eventually, I would assume that those spot welds will break and the tool will no longer be good, but I have yet to have one of those welds pop or break on me. So these are handy to have. They don't take up much room in your toolbox. I've seen fabricated ones where they're basically just two pieces of metal with another thin plate in between, and then just a ton of pop rivets all the way down both sides, and then you can manufacture and make them for as deep a bend as you want or as long a bend as you want. It's probably not going to be the same as a big sheet metal shop where they have a brake that will handle 10, 12-foot long pieces of metal and do all sorts of intricate profiles and many different folds in many different directions, but it's a good start for the field. The next kind of two sets of tools that I have that are specialty tools, these are more aimed towards standing seam roofs, basically. So that's what I have them for, but they'll work in other situations too. These two red tools here, these are both made by a company called Stubai, and they're out of Austria. They're a little bit spendy for what they are, but they do a very good job. These are almost specifically for folding the bottom tab of a standing seam roof panel over eave trim. The eave trim will stick out in a straight length, and our standing seam roof will stick out about an inch past that, and then we'll give it a 180-degree fold and clamp it onto that eave trim. This particular bender, this will slide over that 1-inch bend. As I pick it up, it pivots down and clamps the metal, and I can rotate it around and almost get a 180-degree bend. I lift the handle up, it unclamps, and I can slide it off the piece of metal. So that'll get me my beginning bend. And then this tool here, this clamps it or locks it down. So basically the long handle, this narrow long handle, will sit on top of the roofing, and as I pull up on this handle, it will move that lower jaw in a pivot and capture the remains of that bend and really clamp it down, so I can pull on it and really lock that hem in on the bottom of our eave trim. That allows for, number one, expansion and contraction of those roof panels, because they'll be able to slide back and forth without any fasteners at the bottom edge, and it will keep that roof locked down tight at the bottom edge, so wind and things like that can't get up under it. So it allows for expansion and contraction. It looks good, and you don't have any fasteners, and it keeps wind from getting underneath your roofing to create an uplift problem. And finally, for kind of the high-end field benders that we would have, these are tools made by a company called Wuko. It's also an Austrian company. The Austrians seem to really like bending sheet metal. So this particular one, this is designed for bending metal. It will go from approximately 1 inch, a little bit less than 1 inch, I should take that back. It will go from probably maybe a 1/4 inch up to 8 inches wide. And basically you adjust this end along these two bars, lock it down to whatever measurement you want, and you insert this or slide it over the edge of your sheet metal. It runs up against wheels on the front here, and also these wheels here. It's got 3 die wheels on the bottom and 1 on top, and as you roll it along your sheet metal, you start to fold it and bring it up, and you can bring it up to a 90-degree angle. This is a single die. It only has 1 set of wheels that stick out on this 1 set of rods. They have longer ones with 2 sets, and that's for really long straight sections. This one can be used on radiuses. I have not personally used it yet on a radius, but if you do have a slight radius and you need to roll a hem up, you can do that with this tool. This is really good when you're doing a standing seam roof, where you're going to have eave trim that caps over the edge of your roofing material, and you don't want water to get up underneath that trim and then go down inside of the trim, in between the trim and the building. What you would typically do is you would bend your last or first panel up the same height as your standing seam and put that eave trim over the top of it. That way you've got an actual pan that's folded up on both sides. Even though you can't see it, you want that detail there so water doesn't get underneath your eave trim and get down potentially under your roofing and in between your eave trim and this fascia. So that is typically a situation that will occur when you do put on a roof system. The building may not be that perfect 16-inch increment, 12-inch increment, whatever size your standing seam pans are. So you'll want to balance your cuts on either end. So instead of having a 16-inch panel here and a 3-inch panel here, you might have an 8-inch or 9 or 10-inch panel on either side, and then you bend your 2 sides up. So that's where that tool would come in handy. Then, if you need to get a full 180-degree hem on a piece of sheet metal, this is what they call their disco bender. And basically this will take a 90-degree piece of metal, metal that's been bent to 90 degrees. You can slide this over and lock it in place. And again, as you're running this back and forth, you're starting to apply some pressure on it and you're bending it. And this will give you basically a hem that's as open as this disc on the bottom. So it gives you a nice 180-degree bend. Like I said, some of these tools are very special for standing seam roofs or siding. For a good professional, nice installation of a roof or siding system, the fewer exposed fasteners you have, the better. And these tools help achieve that goal. You don't want to see raw cut edges. You don't want to see just straight metal edges. The fewer the fasteners, the fewer will fail, the fewer can leak, all that kind of stuff. So investing in some of these tools makes a whole roof system look so much better. Believe me, it's a lot of work, but it looks so good when you're done. I am going to cut some sample pieces up out of this thinner sheet metal. This stuff's relatively thin. And we'll show on camera some of the features, some of the capabilities that these different seamers or benders have. I would always strongly recommend wearing gloves. Sheet metal cuts really fast when you're not expecting it. And it's one of those things where you have to wait 5-10 seconds to see how bad it is based on when the blood starts typically. I know that sounds gross and awful, but that is the truth. Not great, but that's unfortunately how it happens. So let's see here. I am going to create a little bit of a box here. I'm just going to roughly cut some corners off of this. This is extremely thin sheet metal. It's not neat, it's not perfect or concise, but here's our Malco 12F bender. I'm going to use a 1-inch side. Like I said, there is a reference or index hole here to let me know that I'm all the way in there, and I'll just bend it straight up and give myself a 90-degree bend. It's really easy, really fast, and if I want to do another one, I'll slide it onto here since I'm kind of at a corner. Just bend it up like that, and now I've got kind of almost a pan started. I could cut it differently if I needed to, but in this situation, being that I cut a 45 off of there, I can make a 180-degree bend in this. So I'm going to go ahead and put that folder back on, and I'm going to push it down. As you can see, it's not super tight, but it gets fairly tight. So that's a nice feature there. I'm going to use these hand seamers, and in this case, I'm going to lock it down and squeeze it shut so it's a nice tight seam. Now I've got a finished edge, no problem with a raw cut or anything like that. I could again use the seamer or the plate bender, or I could do this with these hand benders, and just as I'm working my way back and forth, I'm going a little bit at a time. The thicker the metal, the worse it's going to be, more challenging it is, but I get it to where I can start kind of closing the seamer on there. And now I've got a fairly nice edge. If I have, you know, restrictions on where I can get in, I could take an offset pair and I could start bending like that. The only problem is if I bend too far with just one bend, I start getting kinks, and those are kind of hard to work out because you get into a place like this and you have to start kind of nibbling at it and wiggling, and it doesn't look as good. So it's a little warbly there, but that is a way to bend without one of those plate benders. Doesn't look good. There's a little bit, as you can see right through here, there's a little bit of a mar and a bend right there. So that's with the Malcos with the texture. Let's see if we can get the camera to pick up on that. Maybe. There we go. You can see that texture in there. That can mar up your finished metal. Now we talked about this stubai here. Stubai. This is the bender that clamps on and rotates. So let's see here. We'll pretend that this is our roof edge right about here. I don't know if it'll work too well on this, but slide it onto our piece of metal here. Lift the handle up just a little bit. And then as you rotate, it's wanting to pull it down over the edge, but as you rotate, it starts to bend that line there. So I think I'll kind of hand bend it. Again, this is extremely thin metal. It's way nicer than the 24 gauge stuff we were doing on a roof just these last couple of weeks for a friend. So I just bent it back, kind of mimicking what this particular stubai tool will do on the end of a standing seam roof. And then to lock it, we would put this over the edge, hold it down against the roof, and then as I pull this handle forward, this jaw here rotates down and clamps. So that will produce a nice locked seam here. So at the edges where it didn't hit it, it's more open than in the middle. So it actually does crimp it down pretty nicely and gives you a really nice hem on the edge. Now for the Wuko, I've got a piece clamped here. Let's do a 1-inch hem, or bend, I should say. So I've set it. It's got a index along the top, so I've set it here. You can see it's got Wuko on there, and it's got all these nice stainless steel bearings and all that good stuff. So I'm going to start on the metal. And with each pass, I'm lifting it up, raising it a little bit more. Not sure what that was. So it gives me a nice bend, as long as it doesn't pop or do anything weird. And it gives me exactly what I want for my hem at the edge, or the fold. So as I said, that's good for a long, straight shot. It also does a bit of a curve. We'll try that here in just a minute. And then if I want to create that 180-degree hem, I take this disco bender and I slide the big disc wheel here over the metal that I just created, or that bend. It's got a little stop block here that I can pull out and rotate this out of the way so that I don't have to. I could put the tool on at the edge of the metal, or I could start in the middle. So again, you just roll it back and forth. Might have gone a little bit too far on that one in one stop, or one shot. So then I have that nice 180-degree hem right there. If I wanted to join two pieces of metal on a roof or something like that, I'll just quick bend this one over. I could create another hem, and I could lock that together. Now for the fun part. I haven't done this before, don't know if it'll work, but I just cut kind of an arch or radius on this piece of metal. Again, it's pretty thin stuff. We're going to clamp it down. We're going to see if the Wuko can do it, what it'll do, if anything. It still kind of amazes me that it possibly could do a 90-degree bend on sheet metal like this. So let's find out. don't know how much of a radius this can actually go around, or if it'll oil can the thing like massive crazy. Definitely doesn't like that part. Yeah, this might be a little bit too much for it. It's kind of rippling along here. I think that's probably about as good as it's going to get. Might go a little bit more. You know, honestly, it did start to create a bend on that radius. So metal, it's not a metal stretcher. It's not going to shrink or grow the metal. I mean, there are ways of actually doing that, unlike board stretchers that don't exist. But yeah, it kind of started on it, so that's... Well, there you have it. That is kind of a quick overview of different types of sheet metal bending tools that you could get out in the field or use in the field. Like I said, this isn't the fabrication shop with the big old brake where you can do just all sorts of offsets and bends and interesting shapes like that. You definitely have the option of getting some of those shapes in. It's a little bit more work. You can get some radius things somewhat. I've done jobs where we had big barrel vaulted sheet metal standing seam roofs, and those, you know, go through big rollers and dies and things like that where they can actually stretch that vertical seam to get that radius. But this isn't quite there. So maybe a much greater radius or gradual, gentle radius, you could get that. But it definitely starts getting there. This selection of tools, there are levels of complexity or value to them. The very simple ones where you might just use some clamps and a rubber mallet, that might be good for you. Maybe just a pair of hand seamers like these. I had these for many years before I got something additional, which was just this little plate bender. These two tools here were immensely valuable and beneficial to me for many, many years because these did pretty much everything I needed. When I got into more specialty stuff where I was doing standing seam roofs and siding and things like that, then I got into additional tools that were a little bit more specialized or bigger capacity. So that's one of those things that you need to look at when you're getting into this kind of work or where you may be doing it. A lot of times, even some of the expensive tools, if buying the tools and having the time and the ability and the, you know, motivation to do it yourself, those tools might actually be cheaper than hiring somebody else to do it. So you make that investment, you get those skills, those abilities, that knowledge, and the tools, and you can do jobs like that from here on out. So I will just reiterate, sheet metal can cut very fast. Please, please, please be very careful working with this stuff. It will slice you, it will dice you, it will fillet you. And it is not fun because it can be jagged and nasty, or it can be a razor slice. And, you know, you're waiting to see how bad the blood is. And the ones you think that are bad aren't, and the ones that you didn't even realize you had start bleeding all over the place. So please just be careful. Use the appropriate PPE. There are cut-resistant gloves out there. They are not cut-proof, but they are cut-resistant. There are different levels. Look at the different levels. Decide what you're doing. Be very careful. Just because your hands are covered with gloves doesn't mean that you can't get sliced on your forearm or your side or wherever. So just be very aware of it. They even sell sleeves that are Kevlar to help mitigate slices and things like that. Glass companies, they wear those things quite a bit. So do sheet metal companies. So there's a reason to wear them, and there's a reason they're out there, because a lot of people have gotten hurt badly with sheet metal. So please keep that in mind. Please be safe when you're working with it. Doing a good job installing sheet metal, whether it's siding, HVAC duct, exhaust fan ductwork, roofing, a nice installation looks really good and you can be proud of it. So these are some of the tools that will help you with that. So this is Dan with Dan and Sarah Makers. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Tool Tuesday. We are going to be using these tools on our garden shed, installing a standing seam roof. We'll go into that in a lot more detail and show you all the specifics as we actually install it with valleys. So you'll actually be able to see a lot of this stuff in action in a real situation, not just some pieces of sheet metal here. So please stay tuned for that video. Yeah, we hope these videos inspire you to get out there and do something. We really hope you do. We enjoy getting out there and doing something, all sorts of somethings. Like, subscribe, share, comment. If you've got advice, if you've got experience, let other people know. That really helps everybody out there in the YouTube community. I don't know anything or everything by any means about a lot of stuff. So your experience, your specialty, let us know. We appreciate that. And then, as always, you can follow us on Instagram at Dan and Sarah Makers. So until next time, this is Dan. Have a good one. Bye.